Welcome, my fellow heartache connoisseurs. I'm your host, Marty Carpenter. I come to you from flyover country. Just a country psychiatrist out here, classically trained in the tradition of the great physician, doing the Lord's work. And today, I want to talk about a little thing called love. We're going to continue our discussion on love. Now, love is more than mystical. It's difficult to describe and understand and explain. And I don't claim to know everything. Believe you me, I am a learner. But I like to philosophize in the shower. And then tell you what I've come up with. So that's what I'm going to do today. And we're going to continue to examine love kind of under this model of the states of matter, solid, liquid, and gas. My last one we tackled love as a solid, and today I'm going to consider the properties of a liquid and how love is like that. So, a little story. I run a little cold. I'm a little bit of a cold-blooded guy. And once in a while, if it overtakes me, I will get so cold that I will go into sort of this shiver mode with the teeth chattering. I'm almost paralyzed. And it comes on very suddenly. It's like if I get a blast of cold air or something that I wasn't expecting or something like that. So the other night, I get out of bed to urinate, and boom. It's like freezing in my bedroom for some reason. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't, but it felt super cold, and I started to shiver, and I had a choice at that point because I had to pee. I could either dive back under the covers and try to warm up, but then I'd still have to pee, or I could make a break for the toilet. But I was going to be shivering, and you know what that does to your aim. So I had an idea. I know. I'll turn on the shower, let it get nice and warm, and then I'll get in there and I'll let her rip. It's all pipes, Jerry. It's all pipes. So I did that, and it was like the longest, it was that moment where I was like, when we built the house, the contractors were like, we can put these little really super expensive devices next to your water heater that make it so you never have to wait for hot water. And I was like, no, I don't need that. Well, this was a moment where I wished I'd had those, because I was sitting there waiting for this water to warm up, shivering, and having to pee all at the same time. Dark and lonely in the middle of the night. So it finally gets warm, and I get in there, and it's like an immediate relief in more ways than one. And I begin to warm up, and it's really an effective way to warm up. Maybe you've seen Empire Strikes Back, and when Luke's out sleeping in a tauntaun, they haul him back to base and dip him in a giant test tube and leave him there to warm up. Well, that's kind of what it was like, and I'm sitting there thinking, this is what love does to our icy hearts, man. It gets in there and warms us up. And so let's talk about liquid. Liquid is a state of matter, of which there are 4 if you count plasma, but nobody knows much about that. I'm still in junior high physics mode here. I don't know much more than the basics, but the solid, liquid, gas. Liquid fills a container. It fills whatever container it's in. It's affected by gravity. It goes to the very lowest of the low point within that container. Liquid cleanses. Liquid nourishes. It waters. Liquid flows. Liquid evaporates. You can bathe in it. You could also drown in it. And it's a powerful force. The Grand Canyon, carved by a liquid. The smooth pebbles you like to skip on top of the water, they're smooth because of liquid. The sands of the beach are sandy because liquid, over millions of years, have eroded the rocks and the soil and everything around the edges of the land where the land meets the water, and it's created sand. Liquid is beautiful when it's in motion. It's one of the great tourist attractions of the United States, Niagara Falls. People like to live near water. They like to live near lakes and rivers and have creeks running through their backyard and have little fountains they buy at Lowe's with frogs and stuff, fake frogs in them. They like that too. Myself included. I'm not putting down the plastic frog-loving people out there. I'm just not doing that. So that's been my experience. I mean, and then you get this whole thing about God and God's love. And I just, you know what, I have to talk about God because he makes me really excited sometimes. And that's the way it feels. You know, it feels like when you encounter a love, be it your romantic partner or God or the thing that you love, it gives you a warm feeling that flows inside of you, around you. And then also, because of that, you then have the ability to sort of send it on and let it flow out from you. And it's certainly been my experience that the more time I spend in this state of allowing love to flow, it has shaped the hard rocks of my soul into something smoother. It has cleansed me into something that is more capable of seeing beauty, more capable of seeing good, less cynical, more able to assume the best about the people in my life. I can see the difference, and it's been very gradual. It's not something that happens to you overnight, and I'm sure that there's a long way to go, but it's worth it. Here's an interesting thought. Love also, or water rather, when you first get into it, oftentimes it's pretty jarring. The temperature, lower than body temperature, it wakes us right up. It's I remember working at this summer camp when I was a teenager, and it was down in Arkansas, and I probably would have never gone and did that, but this gal I liked at the time was applying to go work there, and so I decided that it would be a good idea also to apply and go work there, and then she doesn't get the job and I do. So now I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll go to this summer camp and work. But it was fine. But this thing they did to us in the morning, they had us go down to the lake, like first thing at sunrise, and swim, like during the counselor training. And it was brutal. I mean, I hated every minute of it at first. And then after you're in for a little while, you get used to it. And you look around and you realize, wait a minute, I'm in this lovely wooded location in the mountains, and it's beautiful and clean, and there's mist on top of the water, and I'm doing okay. It's a little chilly, but it's worth it for this experience. And I think love's a little bit like that. You know, you do to some degree have to dive in, and it can be jarring. Now, you might say, well, the waters I've encountered have been polluted. They've been dirty, stinky, smelly. I've tried this love thing. I've dove in hip deep, and it hurt. It hurt real bad. And that's true. And I think that we have to be mindful of the fact that the waters we offer someone else aren't always very clean. And when we're inviting someone to love us, we're asking somebody to jump in a pool that may be carrying some toxins and may be a little bit stagnant and putrid. Now, how do you fight off the putridness? Because you know this concept, right? I mean, Water, if you don't let it flow. I grew up on a farm, and we had this old farm pond down the hill from the house, and sometimes the tube that drained the pond would get plugged with, well, the beavers would do it. They'd chew down the trees, and they'd bring them over to this pipe that was put there to drain the water, and the pond would just become this stagnant, murky, disgusting place that was unable to support life except for, algae and fungus and stinky stuff. And dad used to offer to pay me $10 a beaver to go down there and shoot them. I never got one, but I tried a few times, sat there and just kind of stared at those logs, thinking maybe a beaver would pop his head up over one of them, but they never did. But that's beside the point. But what we would do is we would go literally remove those logs one at a time with our bare hands and throw them out of the way, and the water would start to flow again, and you'd wait a little bit and it would clean itself up naturally, and then it would support fish again, and it would turn into a system that was much more functional. The other example, here's a good example of non-flowing water. There's this, it's a hog wallow. This is another thing we had growing up on the farm is, hogs, maybe another good metaphor too, they need liquid to stay cool. I guess they don't have a lot of sweat glands or any sweat glands. They are, however, intelligent. And so if you smack one on the ass with a 2x4, it will remember you. But anyway, they like to lay around and wallow. And they wallow in a combination of water, soil, and their own feces and urine. And we love to eat them. And I think that's another example. I mean, what they love even more, though, is when you take the garden hose down there and you shoot it at them. And they just get their faces right under the hose, and they shake their faces back and forth, and you hose all that mud off of them, and they love it. And when they don't have the hose, they just go to the next best thing, which is the wallow. And that's what we do. We just go to the wallow that we think works for us. And we maybe don't realize that there is a fire hose available to us in the form of our Creator. But back to this concept of flow. Water's got to flow or it goes stagnant. And so you've got to allow yourself to be poured into if you want to pour out effectively. So if you're one of these people that is offering putridness everywhere you go, it could be because you're not allowing flow. You're not allowing yourself to be loved. And that comes with consequences. And there's a few reasons why people don't allow themselves to be loved. I would say for the most part, it's out of a place of fear, and it's out of a place of really rational and deep-seated instinctual drive to survive. Because to open yourself up vulnerably to someone and allow them to love you means to give them information that could be used against you. It means to talk intimately with someone about yourself, about your secrets and your heart and your desires and your dreams. And that comes with some risk, because people can take that and twist that and use that against you, and it's very painful, and it makes you want to dam up and not share anymore, which makes a lot of sense. Except that you then become putrid. And we try to kind of cover this up. We sort of do everything we can to kind of take our aquariums, if you will, and paint them with this or that so that you can't see what's in there. But as it turns out, you got to clean off the walls of the aquarium and let the light shine through. And that also has a purifying effect. Is that the sunlight is actually a great disinfectant. And that's the truth. If you take water that's putrid and murky and put it in a closed container and set it out and let the sun shine on it, it will naturally clean it and disinfect it. And so there's a couple of ways, the metaphor goes on here with flow and light as a couple of ways that we can begin to get cleaned up. So back to risk. It seems as if pretty much everything in life that's worth anything requires some element of risk. I went to a church once, and one of the sayings was, you spell faith R-I-S-K. And this doesn't just mean faith in God. I think, though, that is primarily where the true risk, the deepest risk resides, is whether or not we're going to risk faith. But we practice for that in the form of our romantic relationships and our relationships with our children and relationships with causes and such that matter to us. But at some point you have to say to yourself, I don't know how this is going to go. I don't really know if this person is going to love me back the way that I've always wanted to be, or the way that I've expected to be, or imagined it could be. I just got married last Saturday, and that's a risky thing. I've been through a divorce, and it doesn't always go well. Sometimes things fall apart, and we dam up to one another, and we have walls, and we don't allow an intermingling of our waters. And I realize that. But what are you going to do? Are you just going to sit in your own filth and wallow? Or are you going to kind of chip away at the walls and let the flow start up again? Is something better than nothing? And I think the answer is yes. I think that for me, the idea of risking is much more appealing than staying safe. Because I've stayed safe, and safe ultimately does not pan out very well. It seems to be a fundamental principle of the universe that for us to propagate and beautify this place, that we have to take some risks. Think of those salmon swimming upstream, risking it all to spawn. They got to go through bears. They got to go through torrents. They've got to burn so much of their energy to get to the goal that they don't have anything left. Well, I don't think it's quite like that. I think that when we ultimately give ourselves in risk, that we find ourselves supported in ways that we were not expecting. And that's what faith is. Faith is putting a foot out there where we don't see another plank on the bridge. And as our foot comes down to fall through that hole, the plank emerges and we are provided for. And we look out over that bridge and we don't see any planks, but we've just taken one successful step and we have a little bit more courage. And so we take another one. And that's how courage works. There's a lot of people that maybe don't understand this, is that you don't get the courage until after you do the thing. Every time you take a risk, it comes with fear. 100% of the time. You think skydiving doesn't scare the crap out of everybody a little bit every time? I don't care how tough they think they are. You're looking at your own death out the window of an airplane, and then you jump. It's scary. But then on the way down, I've never done it, and I never will. Because I'm scared out of my mind of heights. I say that. See, that's whenever I say something like that, that's when it always gets me in trouble. If I make a vow, I'm never going skydiving, and then I'm gonna find it gnawing at me on the inside. Marty, you probably ought to overcome that fear. You probably ought to do that and practice what you preach. But you got to risk. You got to take a step, and not know exactly how it's going to go. And that's the way it is with love. Now, let's say you're with a person, you've been with a partner, and you're considering taking that risk, but you actually kind of do know how it's going to go. You've been with them, you know it's dramatic and tumultuous, and that your relationship has primarily been characterized by drama and fighting, betrayal, and that the walls are definitely there, the communication's no good. That's maybe an indication that you shouldn't ought to risk. There are times to risk and times not to, and there are certain situations where you gamble and certain situations where you don't. I know Shelley as well as I can in the time that I've known her, and I knew enough that I felt like it was a good gamble, and I felt like God would rise up to meet us in that relationship, and that it was good, and that it was characterized by things that were healthy: communication, affection, a genuine sense of being cherished and cherishing the other. I knew that was there, and so the risk made sense. Is it still a risk? You bet. It's a risk for a lot of reasons. Anything can happen, and you can find yourself betrayed, or just life can just happen, and your partner can get sick. They can get cancer. They can get a head injury. They can get hit by a car. They can lose some fundamental piece of them that is difficult for you. So no matter how you slice it, there's going to be some risk involved. But you do need to be mindful. Am I getting in a hog wallow right here? Or am I jumping in a cool mountain stream? And if we're honest with ourselves, we can tell the difference. And I think that's how it is with God too. We like to think that God has, we like to think God owes us an apology, quite frankly. We like to think that we find ourselves in this mess called planet Earth that's filled with all this suffering and strife. And we like to look at God and say, you know what, that's your fault. I don't think I'm going to take a risk on you. But we don't really take time to learn the truth. We don't spend any time reading and understanding what there is to know about God. We don't explore it. We just sort of write it off oftentimes in favor of our own agenda because it's easier than taking that risk. But you got to ask yourself, how's that going? And if it's not going well, might I ought to consider a risk of one form or another? And I think that all of life will be characterized by a leap of faith. You will be offered many times throughout the course of your life to take a leap of faith. Leaps of faith apply to many different things. It can apply to relationships or work or a faith tradition, deciding to make a commitment to a faith tradition. It can apply to many things, but it's characterized by a not knowing. It's characterized by a wishing you could know, but that being impossible. And you can't know until you do the thing. And so what do? You pray for courage. Enough. You pray for enough faith, the mustard seed amount. It just takes a little. It just takes a little to put that foot out there. And then as you put that foot out there and the plank comes up to meet you, you get more. And it grows over time. And you're not expected to have it all figured out. You're not expected to have all of the faith that you need from the very beginning. That also is supplied for you. Love a liquid. Well, that's how we got here today. And I think we'll wrap it up. I did recently open up a Patreon account on patreon.com, Patreon. And if you feel so moved to support that, I would very much appreciate it. This is something I do. I consider it part of my offering back to the world in an attempt to help take some of the experiences I've had and share them in an attempt to make the world a better place. I see myself as a champion of the larger human family and an ambassador for the causes that affect us all in common as humans. And I take time out of my work to do this, and I've also decided that I'm going to shy away from sponsorships because I think that the kind of message that I'm going for doesn't fit with that very well. And again, there are plenty of great reasons to have sponsors and great products to support. But for me, I'm going to not do that, and I'm going to go with the Patreon instead. So if you would like to support this podcast and kind of join this project, I'd greatly appreciate it, and I think it would be money well spent. I really do. I think it's the kind of thing that you could consider yourself a genuine contributor to something, I hope, and so I encourage you to do that. And thank you for taking the time to listen. You have a lot of choices, and I hope this is helpful. If you find it helpful, very much appreciate it if you'd share the thing, if you'd leave some comments. We'd love to get to know you and build a relationship with you in the form of communication online through social media and such. And feel free to email questions, contact at theheartacheconnoisseur.com, suggestions, anything you want. We're happy to hear from you. And I think that about wraps it up. And so thanks again for listening. I hope the holidays are treating you well. Christmas is right around the corner, so you better get your butts over to Amazon.com. Hey, there's an advertisement right there. Bezos. Let's get some cash flowing my way, would you? I've given you enough. No, I'm just kidding. Amazon's a great company. They do a good job getting you what you ask for pretty quick, I have to say. So anyway, on that note, we will wrap it up. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.